بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على خير خلق الله أجمعين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So inshallah we're going to study and begin now the masail of Sajdah Sahu. We're going to begin now the masail of Sajdah Sahu, and tonight we're going to take masail connected to az-ziyada, the increase in salah, and specifically we're going to speak of an increase in salah in terms of actions that are from the salah, and then in the upcoming lecture we'll take correcting the imam, and thereafter it will be part 2 of the increase in salah, and that is an increase in an action or an increase in increase in actions are doing extra actions outside of salah or eating and drinking. So all those masail will come up inshallah for this segment of an increase in salah by mistake. So beginning with the text, we mentioned yesterday, the definition and the difference between sahu and nisyan, etc., and a little bit of an intro into Sajdah Sahu. And with the matan, just before we do the matan, there's one thing that we can just mention which will be realized practically, it would come to mind when somebody gets into the situation. We mentioned that Sajdah Sahu, when there's no need for it, it invalidates the salah, because it's an increase in the salah without a valid reason, and it will essentially be intentional increase, right? Because you're increasing to sajdah. Okay, and we said then one of the times you do not do Sajdah Sahu is for a makrooh action. Right, so in saying that, what you'd also find that sometimes when a person does not do a sunnah action, when we say sunnah action, we're referring to an action itself or articulation. So saying, for example, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim more than once would be sunnah, right? So doing it once is waajib, right? So that's in terms of articulating, that is sunnah. And in terms of where to placing the hands on the knees in rukoo, clasping the knees in rukoo in a specific manner, raising your hands for the opening takbir, etc. These are sunnah actions. So sometimes leaving out a sunnah action, sometimes it would be what we've said is before, khilaf al-awla, and sometimes makrooh. So therefore, we mentioned also that to leave out a sunnah action in terms of a manner of salah or articulating something, that would mean Sajdah Sahu is mubah. It's permissible to do it. It's not sunnah to do it or waajib to do it, it's permissible to do it. But we also then would say to leave out the sunnah action at times can be makrooh. So then would it be a contradiction that since this action is now makrooh, you're going to do Sajdah Sahu for a makrooh action? And why do the fuqaha call it mubah to do it? So I hope the issue, if we can call it an issue, is clear. So it would seem from the way the fuqaha phrase it, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best, what they mean when they say makrooh is doing an action that is makrooh. It doesn't refer to leaving out something, and that leaving out something equals a makrooh. What they're referring to is doing something straight away that is makrooh. So the example we mentioned yesterday, for example, if a person does an unnecessary movement or action in salah, one that does not break the salah and one that isn't necessary, then that would be makrooh. So for that it would be makrooh, and therefore you don't do Sajdah Sahu for that. You don't do Sajdah Sahu. So that is an example where you've done something that is makrooh. It's not where you've left off something and the leaving off equals makrooh. So I hope that difference is clear. And then the fuqaha mention, they say يشرع أي يجب تارة ويسن أخرى على ما يأتي تفصيله. So they say Sajdah Sahu is mashru', which means it's something that the sharia has come with. And they mention this because sometimes Sajdah Sahu is waajib, sometimes it's waajib. Some of the situations we touched on in the previous lecture. For example, doing the salam before the time by mistake, or increase or leaving something of the wajibat or arkan of salah by mistake, that would make the Sajdah Sahu wajib. And then we have mubah. At other times it is mubah, as we mentioned. Sometimes it is sunnah to do Sajdah Sahu. Sometimes it is sunnah to do Sajdah Sahu. And at other times you do not do Sajdah Sahu. So Sajdah Sahu takes these different rules of waajib, sunnah, mubah, haram, etc. And then they mention that Sajdah Sahu, there are reasons for performing Sajdah Sahu. So they say لزيادة سهوا ونقص سهوا وشك في الجملة لا في عمد. So they say generally the reasons for Sajdah Sahu come down to three. Most of the fuqaha mentioned three, some add a fourth. And that is, as we mentioned yesterday, is an increase in the salah by mistake, a decrease in the salah by mistake, and doubt in the salah by mistake. And we explained what those three refer to. And the fourth one, some of them add, is لحن يحيل المعنى. لحن يحيل المعنى is where a person makes a mistake in the recitation of the Qur'an. He makes a mistake in the recitation of the Qur'an, and this mistake changes the meaning out of the vibe of the Qur'an. Or gives off a negative meaning. So in this case, if a person were to do such intentionally, then the salah would be invalid. The salah would be invalid because they say it is haram to recite the Qur'an incorrectly, intentionally. It's haram. That's what they mention in one of the chapters in fiqh, in the chapter of Imam or Salatul Jama'ah, one of them. So in saying that, if a person, so the qaida is anything that if you do it intentionally to break the salah, Sajdah Sahu, for that action, if done forgetfully, is waajib. We mentioned the qaida yesterday. So then if a person were to make this mistake in the salah, then Sajdah Sahu becomes waajib if the person did not correct it. Or sometimes it will still be, as we mentioned it later, even if you corrected it, but if you corrected it, then the salah would be valid. If you did not, then the salah would not be valid. So if you were to read, for example, إِيَّاكِ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكِ نَسْتَعِينُ. So إِيَّاكِ changes the meaning, although it's just fathatu kasra. إِيَّاكَ, it changes, it's a masculine إِيَّاكَ, referring to Allah, you alone do we worship. If you made the ka into a ki, you've changed the meaning, because now it's feminine, the pronoun. Or another example the fuqaha mentions is if you recite the verse الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون, if you read الذين هن عن صلاتهن ساهون, so you change the pronoun again to feminine. الذين هن عن صلاتهن ساهون, then the meaning would be changed again. And therefore it would invalidate the salah. They mention even if you were to make a mistake, where the mistake is from the Qur'an. So you made a mistake, but you still came with Qur'an. Right? So the mistake you made did not take you out of the Qur'an, but the meaning was corrupted. So you read, for example, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. So you read the verse, though indeed those who believe, those who bring iman and do good deeds, that's from the Quran. أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. It's from another verse. So you, by mistake, you recited it. You recited indeed those who believe, bring iman and do good actions. They are from the people of the hellfire. If you recited it like that by mistake, though both are from the Quran, the meaning is totally distorted, and therefore you have to do Sajdah Sahu. But small mistakes that do not really affect the meaning of the Quran, like if you were to read, for example, Alhamdi lillahi rabbil alameen, Alhamdi lillah, or Alhamda lillah. So they don't really change the meaning. Even though it's a mistake, then they don't really change the meaning. So this, we mention more details of it, and sometimes it becomes difficult practically, because people not knowing the meaning of the Quran, and sometimes, or like Taraweeh, for example, mistakes happen, then it becomes a bit tricky to do Sajdah Sahu in every set of 2 rak'ah, for example. So that has more details, and in fact they don't touch on it in full details in this chapter. They speak on it when they speak on the rules regarding an imam, and he makes a mistake in recitation there. So either here when we come in Sajdah Sahu we'll discuss on it more, or when we discuss the chapter of imam, inshallah. So they say fil jumlah. So that means in general. Not at every single increase, the salah, this sahu, this sajda, or this invalidation of the salah. No, and not every single decrease. Because as we come across, you're going to find situations where sometimes there's an increase in the salah, or decrease, or doubt, and the salah becomes invalid. And we said if something invalidates the salah, then there's no sajda to sahu. And sometimes the salah is still valid. And there's no need for sajda to sahu. So that's why they say fil jumlah. That means in general is a starting point. as a principle you can work with, that generally an increase, decrease or doubt will lead to sajda to sahu in general, but not every single situation. Then they say la fi amdin, la fi amdin. They say not, we don't do sajda to sahu if these mistakes were done intentionally. And we mentioned it yesterday. Well, the second, I think it was the second point I mentioned, is that sajda to sahu is not done when these things, these increase or decrease or doubts cannot happen intentionally, but mainly an increase or decrease intentionally in the salah. So therefore, if a person were to intentionally leave out a waajib action or a pillar of the salah would be invalid, or a rak'ah, salah would be invalid. If he were to leave out a sunnah action, the salah would be valid. The salah would be valid, but sajda to sahu is there. Sajda to sahu is there to make up for the shortcoming in the salah. Where there was a little slip, a little lapse, a person missed something, then sajda to sahu patches it up. Sajda to sahu patches it up, fixes it up. Here a person does not, this action he's done intentionally doesn't deserve patching up. So they say it does not happen for a person who leaves out something or increases something intentionally. And they also say Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, إِذَا سَهَى أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيَسْجُدْ. If one of you forgets in the salah, then let him perform sajda to sahu. The opposite, the meaning of that, what is understood from that, if one forgets in salah, therefore if someone did not forget it, did it intentionally, then there's no sajda to sahu. Then there's no sajda to sahu. Then the next mas'ala, they say في صلاة الفرض والنافلة متعلق بيشرع. So the next mas'ala, they say that sajda to sahu is done in fardh salah and in nafl salah. So not only in the fardh salah. Why do they touch on this mas'ala? Because the aspect of a nafl salah, according to most of the ulama, it's not obligatory to complete a nafl salah. It's not obligatory to complete a nafl salah. A person could break the nafl salah for no reason. It will be makrooh. It will not be haram according to most of the ulama except the Hanafi madhab, but he can do so. So therefore, if a person made a mistake and the salah became invalid, there's no sin. So would you still fix up that? Would you still want to fix up and patch up that mistake? The answer would be yes. The answer would be yes. They say because the texts and ahadith that come regarding this, they do not differentiate between fardh and nafl, number one. And number two, they say that the nafl salah is a complete salah. It resembles the fardh salah. It resembles the fardh salah. Therefore, the same rules would apply. Therefore, the same rules would apply. And lastly, the question would be, as we just said, a nafl salah you do not need to complete. You do not need to complete. So why would you still say sajda to sahu becomes obligatory in the nafl salah at times to make sure the nafl salah gets completed and completed properly, when completing the nafl salah is not even needed in the first place? I hope the question is clear. So the ulama mention that yes, nafl salah you do not need to perform it in the start. Nafl salah, when we say nafl salah, we're referring to all non-fard salah. And that would include witr, because witr, according to the majority of the ulama, is not waajib. It's not waajib. So it would fall under sunnah salah. And the bigger term would be non-obligatory or nafl salah. When they say nafl salah, they refer to all non-fard salah. So therefore, since it's not obligatory to perform a nafl salah, yet alone complete a nafl salah, they say, but once a person starts the nafl salah, then he has to perform salah properly. And therefore, a mistake in the nafl salah, then he has to fix it up properly. Then the next mas'ala, they mention types of salah where sajda to sahu is not done if there's a mistake in it. They mention types of salah where sajda to sahu is not done if there's a mistake in it. So they say salatul janazah. They say salatul janazah is a salah where there's no sajda in the salah itself. So you do not do sajda to sahu in it for a mistake. So there's no sajda to sahu for salatul janazah. There's no sajda to sahu if a person made a mistake in sajda to tilawa or in sajda to shukr. They say no sajda to tilawa, no sajda to sahu if a person made a mistake in sajda to tilawa or in sajda to shukr. They say the qaida al-musaghar la yusaghar. So these qawaid, like this one I mentioned, there's a bit of question whether how fiqh are they? How fiqh are they? And the whole detail on how some of these qawaid came about with Imam Kisa'i and others from the linguists, and Imam Muhammad from the Hanafi school, etc. We'll mention it inshallah when we teach qawaid. But for now, the qaida is something that is small already, something that is small. You do not make it even smaller. You do not make it even smaller. So what that kind of means, or some even question this qaida. Muhammad al-Khalwati mentions it in his hashiyah regarding this very mas'ala of sajda to tilawa or sajda to shukr. They write there that perhaps what he means al-musaghar la yukabbar. Al-musaghar la yukabbar. So it can be either of the two. Okay, so what that means is an action that is already small, you do not do something over it that makes it even smaller. Even smaller. So what that means? That means sajda to shukr or sajda to tilawa is one sajda. But sajda to sahu is going to be two. So to make a mistake in the one sajda, you're going to fix it up by doing two sajda. So the small action, which is just one sajda, becomes even smaller now because what you're patching it up with is bigger than it. Or al-musaghar la yukabbar. The fact that it's one sajda, the small action is one sajda, you do not patch it up with something that's even bigger than it, as in two sajda. So they mentioned that there's no sajda to sahu for a mistake in sajda to tilawa or sajda to shukr. Or there's also no sajda to sahu if a person makes a mistake in sajda to sahu. If a person makes a mistake or doubts in sajda to sahu, then he doesn't do sajda to sahu for that. He doesn't do sajda to sahu for that. So he doubts how many sajda he's done for sajda to sahu. So we'll tell him, as we're going to mention, okay, he's not sure, is it 2 or 3? What should he do? He should take 2, unless he's waswasa. He's not sure, is it 1 or 2? We'll tell him take 1, do another sajda, unless he's waswasa, we'll tell him 2. So would we say, now you have this doubt, you're going to build on certainty, so 1 sajda, so you're going to do another sajda, thereafter do another 2 sajda to sahu for your mistake in sajda to sahu? No, we won't. We'll tell him in this case, do your second sajda and do your salam. That's it. So you won't do sajda to sahu for a mistake in sajda to sahu, or a mistake after sajda to sahu, or a mistake after you've done sajda to sahu already. You do not do sajda to sahu for a mistake after sajda to sahu, even if it's before your salam. And we're going to mention the Hanbali madhab along with a few others, or there's sometimes sajda to sahu is done before salam, sometimes after salam. So sometimes you're going to do the salam, then sajda to sahu, then salam again. Sometimes you're going to do your at-tahiyyah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, your dua, then sajda to sahu, then you're going to sit up, then salam. Or tashahhud, and salam upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then salam. We'll mention the details when we get there, but sometimes it's done before the salam, sometimes after the salam. So irrespective whether you've made this mistake, this forgetfulness, after a sajda to sahu, and this irrespective whether this sajda to sahu was done before or after the salam, there's not going to be another sajda to sahu. There's not going to be another sajda to sahu. In saying that, there's one mas'ala that connects to that, and that is if a person did sajda to sahu by mistake or forgetfully, meaning this person thought, we said sajda to sahu when there's no reason invalidates the salah, right? So now this person thought he had to do sajda to sahu, and then he did sajda to sahu. Then after sajda to sahu, he realized sajda to sahu was a mistake. So what do we say to this person? The rule for this person would be that what he's actually done is he's increased 2 sajda in the salah. So he's made as an increase in the action in salah, therefore he has to do sajda to sahu. So here he do sajda to sahu for his sajda to sahu. Here he do sajda to sahu for the fact he did sajda to sahu by mistake. For the fact he forgetfully or by mistake did sajda to sahu. So here he do sajda to sahu again. So it will be as if it's the second time, but the first time was not actually sajda to sahu because it was a mistake. So it looks as if there was just 2 sajda increased in salah, and it was done by mistake. He thought he had to do it. So the salah would not be invalidated, and he'd do sajda to sahu to make up for this mistake. So now the next mas'ala, they say, فَمَتَى زَادَ فِعْلًا مِنْ جِنْسِ الصَّلَاةِ. So they say whoever increases an action from the actions of salah, whoever increases, so that's our first point. It's an increase. and then an action, which means when we say increase, it's not a decrease or it's not doubt. And then when they say action, meaning it's not something you say. So that's all masail we're focusing on, min jinsi salah, from the actions that are from salah. It's not an action that is foreign to salah. It's an action from the actions of salah. Right? So that's our masail we're looking at in the next few lines. So they say qiyaman fi mahalli qu'udin. They say if you increase a standing in salah in the place where you should sit. Right? Or they say you sit in a place where you should stand. Or they say you do rukoo in a place where it's not rukoo. Or you do sajdah in a place where you don't do sajdah. Amdan batalati salah. Right? If you do this intentionally, then your salah is invalid. You do this intentionally, your salah is invalid. And we mentioned yesterday, I mentioned that if done intentionally, the rule is different. Sometimes it invalidates the salah. If it doesn't, then there's no sajdah to sahu. We mentioned it just now. And here, these increases in the salah, these four increases would invalidate the salah because it changes the whole structure of the salah. Salah other than kusuf only has one rukoo. It only has 2 sajdah per rak'ah, etc. You can't perform 5 rak'at for dhuhr, where it's 4, etc. So these things would invalidate the salah if done intentionally. And then if done unintentionally, then you do sajdah to sahu, and sajdah to sahu is waajib in this case. Sajdah to sahu wajiba, it's wajiba in this case. Okay? So in saying that, let's now break down these few lines that we've mentioned. They say whoever increases qiyaman fi mahalli qu'udin, standing posture in a place where he has to sit. Okay, and now when we say qiyam, when we say a standing, that's going to mean you have to do sajdah to sahu. We don't only mean when a person is fully standing, right? Because we're going to mention a bit later, if a person is supposed to sit, let's say after the second sajdah of the second rak'ah, he's supposed to sit now, but he gets up. As he is getting up, he remembers. Then he comes and he sits down. So he's not fully up. He just got up a little bit. Then here he'd have to do sajdah to sahu. In the Hanbali madhab, he'd have to do sajdah to sahu. Right. So therefore, when they say qiyam, they mean in general. Meaning, you would just call it qiyam. You just call it standing. But even if a person were to get up a little, he has to do sajdah to sahu. It would be as if he increased in a posture. Then they say, أو قعودا في محل قيام, or he increased sitting in a place where he had to stand. ولو قل كجلسة الاستراحة. So this person sat in a place where he had to stand. So for example, he was getting up from the second sajdah of the first rak'ah. Here he'd have to stand, but by mistake he sat down. So they say وَلَوْ قَلَّ كَجَلْسَةِ الْإِسْتِرَاحَةِ, even if that amount of sitting was so little like jalsatul istiraahah. So jalsatul istiraahah is a sitting some of the madhahib have, and that is like the Shafi'i madhab or the second opinion in the Hanbali madhab. The general opinion of the Hanbali madhab is there's no jalsatul istiraahah. It means a sitting of rest, a sitting of just regaining one's strength, meaning after your second sajdah of the first rak'ah, before going up for the second rak'ah, or your second sajdah of the third rak'ah before getting up for the fourth rak'ah, when you get up, you sit momentarily. It's barely 3 seconds. You just sit and then you lift up and then you get up. So this, some fuqaha say Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did it because the hadith that are narrated Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did it, it was at the end of his life. So here some fuqaha say if a person gets old, he can do it because then he can lift himself up off the ground. It's a bit easier than standing up straight from sajdah to sahu, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did become a bit heavier at the end of his lifetime. So some say if there's a need to do so, then you do so. So if a person is a bit heftier, then it may be easier for him to sit and then get himself up. And some say this is a general sunnah, you do it all times. So the madhab of the Hanabila is that you do not jalsatul istiraahah, the short resting sitting is not a sunnah. So you don't do it. But basically, that's why Muhammad al-Khalwati says that this period of time of jalsatul istiraahah, the Hanbali don't know this. They don't know what it means when they fuqaha say وَلَوْ قَلَّ كَجَلْسَةِ الْإِسْتِرَاحَةِ, even if the sitting is so little like jalsatul istiraahah, because it's not something in the Hanbali madhab according to the relied upon position of the madhab. The second opinion is that if you do jalsatul istiraahah, some mention a specific time for it. But anyway, so this means that this sitting is couple of seconds. It's a couple of seconds. You just gather yourself and you get up. So even if your sitting was a short period, you already have to do jalsah, you also already have to do sajdah sahu. Just like what we mentioned for qiyam. Even if you're just getting up, then you remembered you have to sit down and then you do sajdah sahu. That's why when they say وَلَوْ قَلَّ كَجَلْسَةِ الْإِسْتِرَاحَةِ, some of the Hanbali fuqaha say, Ibn Qundus in his Hashia, he says وَلَوْ قَلَّ, this, even if it's a short period of time, it goes back to whoever increases in salah, whoever increases an action in salah, even if this increase is for a short period of time, a very short period of time, a second or two. You just increased. So it doesn't mean per se that you're getting up from your second sajda of your second rak'ah and you on your way up, your knees and stuff are still on the floor, you've barely left yet. Now you have to do sajda sahu. No, that's as if you're still sitting. But now once you have your knees have left the ground, now you're starting to get up immediately, then you have to do sajda sahu. Then you have to do sajda sahu in the Hanbali madhab. So now, that's why some of the fuqaha are clear. Mar'i al-Karmi in al-Ghaya, Ghayat al-Muntaha, he mentions وَلَوْ قَلْ. So he straight up says that فَمَتَى زَادَ فِعْلًا مِنْ جِنْسِ الصَّلَاةِ وَلَوْ قَلَّ. Even if this increase is very little, then he has to do sajda sahu. So, in saying that, now the fuqaha touch on a few masail regarding to sitting in salah, because sitting in salah, it's not like standing. Standing is for your recitation and after rukoo. But sitting, there's a few types of sitting. So you sit for tashahhud, you sit for between sajda, you sit for jalsatul istiraahah. Between sajda is called jalsatul fasl. The fuqaha call it jalsatul fasl. If you see it in the books, they're referring jalsatul fasl. It's a jalsa, that's a sitting that separates the sajda. It's a jalsa that separates the sajda. So it's called fasl, it differentiates. So you have these few types of sitting, in salah. A person will also pray his qiyam, sitting when he has a need. So there's a few types of sitting in salah. So basically, they have a few masail connected to it. But we're going to try and mention a qaida, inshallah, that will basically, if one knows this, they'll be able to deduce the answer, or they'll be able to deduce the rule if they were to sit, if sitting were to happen in the wrong place. So we say that if a person sat in the correct place, meaning in a place in salah where sitting is to occur. So a person sat in a place where sitting should occur, but a person made a mistake in his intention or in his thoughts of what sitting there should be. Right? So he made a mistake in the intention, but he sat where he should sit. That's one situation. Situation two is where a person sat in the wrong place. A place where you do not sit in the salah. So for example, he sat let's say there's no jalsatul istiraahah, then he sat after the second sajda of the first rak'ah. So here there's no sitting, he sat. Or we can say he sat in a place of sitting, right? This category 2, the one I mentioned first, is this category 2 that I'm mentioning now. Here, sometimes there's a dhikr in this correct place and sometimes there's no dhikr. So it's important to know it like this, then let's then build the masail. Okay, so by way of example, we're starting with what I explained first, or what I called now category 2. So let's call it category 1. A person sits in a place where he should sit, but he had the wrong intention. So for example, he sat thinking, let's assume jalsatul istiraahah is a sunnah. So he sits thinking it is jalsatul istiraahah, but it is actually the sitting between the two sajdas. It's a sitting between the two sajdas. So he thinks he's getting up from his second sajda, so he sits momentarily, because he follows jalsatul istiraahah, and while he is sitting, he realizes this is the sitting between the two sajdas. So here he sat at the correct place. Jalsatul istiraahah has no dhikr, so he did not say any dhikr. Okay, so here he sat at the correct place with the wrong intention, then he realized the correct intention, and no dhikr was said. Either because there's no dhikr in the posture, which is basically jalsatul istiraahah, or he hadn't yet started the dhikr of the posture. So here, did this person increase anything in his salah? Did he increase a sitting in his salah? The answer is no. The answer is no. He sat where he should sit. So therefore, what would the rule be on Sajdah to Sahu currently? There's nothing, because he didn't increase. He didn't increase in his salah. Okay, so now let's say a person sat in a place where he should sit, right? A place where he should sit, but he had by mistake, he thought it was another sitting, so he started the dhikr. So for example, he thought it was the sitting of tashahhud. It was actually the sitting between the two sajdah, but he thought it was the sitting of tashahhud. So he sat, he sat thinking he's getting up from the second rak'ah in the second sajdah of the second rak'ah of a 4 rak'ah salah. So he's supposed to start at-tahiyyatu lillah. That's what he thought. But actually it was the sitting between the two sajdah. It was the sitting between the two sajdah. So he said Allahu Akbar. He started at-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawat wa tayyibat. And then he realized that it's actually the sitting between the two sajdas. So then he stopped the dhikr and he started reciting the dhikr between the two sajdas. So he said, Rabbi ighfirli, Rabbi ighfirli. So he came with the correct dhikr, right? So here what happened? Did he increase a sitting? Did he increase an action? No. Why? Because he sat where he should sit. So what did he increase? He said at-tahiyyatu lillah, at the place where he's not supposed to. So he increased a dhikr that you articulate. Okay. So that is important to know. Why? Because when I mention this next category 2, we're going to see the fruit of the differentiation between the two. So now a person sat, category 2, a person sat where he's not supposed to sit. So for example, he sat before the first sajdah. He sat before the first sajdah. Of any rak'ah, you don't sit before the first sajdah. You sit after the first sajdah, or in some cases after the second one. So he sat before the first sajdah. In this case, what did he do? Whether he said a dhikr or not, did he increase an action? Did he increase in the salah? The answer is yes. Did he increase in action or speech? Either or both. Either or both. But he did for sure increase an action in the salah. So here he increased an action. The previous one we mentioned he increased not an action but articulation, a dhikr. He said a dhikr in the wrong place. What's the difference between the two? The difference between the two comes in the rule of Sajdah Sahu. When you recite a dhikr in the wrong place, a dhikr from salah in the wrong place in salah, Sajdah Sahu is sunnah. Sajdah Sahu is sunnah, which means you can leave it off voluntarily. And Sajdah Sahu, when you do an action in the wrong place, then that is wajibah. It's wajibah. You have to do Sajdah Sahu. So therefore, that's why you mentioned the qaida, or what we've constructed into what hopefully covers the mas'ala. And that is, if a person sits in a place where he should sit, if a person sits in a place where there is sitting in salah, right? Then if he said a dhikr over another posture by mistake, then the Sajdah Sahu. But what is the ruling on Sajdah Sahu? It is sunnah. It is sunnah. If he did not say a dhikr yet, or there's no dhikr in that place, so he sat, let's say for istiraahah, thinking it is tashahhud. He sat for istiraahah by mistake. He sat for istiraahah by mistake and it happened to be tashahhud. It happened to be tashahhud. Then here, what would we say? He just flips his intention. Did he increase any dhikr? No. So Sajdah Sahu, there's no Sajdah Sahu there. If he sat in the wrong place, it becomes an increase of action. Therefore Sajdah Sahu becomes wajibah. Sajdah Sahu becomes wajibah. So I hope that mas'ala is clear. So therefore, we're just going to clarify Jalsatul Istiraahah. The fuqaha say, if Jalsatul Istiraahah, if a person does not follow Jalsatul Istiraahah as being something to do in the salah, and they did it by mistake, Sajdatul Sahu would become wajibah, because it's an increase in the salah. And when we mention Jalsatul Istiraahah, we mean that they say that if the Jalsatul Istiraahah, we said, is a few seconds. So if the increase in the salah was to the length that it takes to do Jalsatul Istiraahah, even if it were to the length of Jalsatul Istiraahah, which is merely 2 seconds, then you have to do Sajdatul Sahu when there's an increase in this case, what the Masail we're speaking about here. Lastly, we're mentioning sometimes Sajdatul Sahu is wajibah, sometimes it is sunnah. What's the fruit of knowing the difference? The fruit of knowing the difference is there are a couple of instances where if a person intentionally leaves out a Sajdatul Sahu that is wajibah, the salah becomes invalid. When are those times? We'll mention it at the end of the chapter when the fuqaha mention it. But leaving out, if a person has sajdah to sahu that is sunnah, then intentionally leaving it out would not affect the salah. It would not affect the salah. But intentionally leaving out a wajib sajdah to sahu, specifically one that it's better to do it before the salah, all these details will come, then the sajdah to sahu, leaving it out would make the salah invalid. So that's the difference to know when is the rule of sajdah to sahu, mainly for the intentionally leaving off. When is it permissible? When is it sunnah? When is it wajibah? Sometimes when it is mubah, then you don't need to, it's not even recommended to do it. You can if you want, but here it's not even, like when it's sunnah, there's still more reward to it. Mubah, in theory, there shouldn't be a reward. There's no reward or sin. Sunnah, there's a reward to it. So when you sajdah to sahu is mubah, permissible, then you cannot, it's the same thing. Sajdah, when it's sunnah, it's better to do so, but if you leave off, does not affect the salah. Wajibah, when you have to do it, but at times when you leave it off intentionally, the salah becomes invalid, and other times it does not become invalid. So hopefully those masail are clear. The next one is rukoo and sujood. And if a person increased the rukoo, intentionally or sajda intentionally. So when we come to the decrease in the salah, then we're going to mention the point at which a person, if he missed something wajib, like the tasbih in the rukoo, and he were to get up, there's a point we mentioned yesterday, before standing up straight, he goes back to rukoo. This would not be deemed an increase. He would just be completing his actual rukoo. So it's one rukoo. So it won't be an increase. Also, that when we link fiqh, what does that mean? That means a late comer, he comes in catching the imam going back into rukoo. Because he forgot his tasbih, he's going up, and while he's going up, he remembers he goes down again. Then this means it's one entire rukoo. That means, did this late comer catch the rak'ah? The answer is yes. So inshallah, in the upcoming lecture, we'll complete a few interesting masail which now relate to a person standing up for an extra rak'ah in salah. Sometimes it will be a rak'ah that we cancel out and the salah will still be valid, and sometimes you can still complete the salah. Like a person, a musafir, he intended 2 rak'ah, and according to majority of the ulama, that it's not wajibah to perform salat of the musafir, it's a shortened salah. So if a person by mistake got up for the 3rd rak'ah, then there's instances, or he can complete the salah as 4 rak'at. But in saying that, those last 2 rak'at, there's a few masail connected to that, and with that we'll see how fiqh joins and builds, inshallah. So there's these few masail, and then we go to the masail when you correct the imam, when he makes a mistake when he increases in salah. And in fact, when they come to correcting the imam, they mention if he decreases in salah, and a few masail connected to it. So we end there for today, inshallah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to teach us that which benefits us, and to benefit us with that which He teaches us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.